Death Note is a classic. Whether you're into anime yourself or not, whether you like the show or not, it cannot be denied that Death Note has earned itself a place in the Anime Hall of Fame. And if you ask me personally, I would even argue a series Hall of Fame. So, why, oh why, do we have to ask ourselves the grueling question, Death Note, masterpiece or basic? Welcome to Rebel Culture and today's episode where I have to try to understand the opinion of those who just don't think that Death Note is worth the hype. Don't worry, I'll be a fair judge and listen to both sides, so no matter which side of the argument you're on, you'll get your fair share to agree and disagree with. If you enjoy our content, then please remember to like and subscribe and help out a new channel like this one. Thank you so much. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of Death Note, let me emphasize that I am exclusively talking about the anime, not the manga, not the live-action remake, or whatever movie adaptation there are. One of the main reasons I think why someone might say that Death Note is basic is because it is very accessible, even for people who don't usually watch anime. For me personally though, something being mainstream doesn't make it basic. Maybe it's just so damn good and that's why everyone likes it. What's wrong with that? So, in my analysis today, I want to actually look at distinct parts of the show and see how they contribute to Death Note, either being a masterpiece or being basic. First, let's have a look at the concept of the show. You have a major component which influences every single action in this anime, namely the Death Note notebook. While Light Yagami, aka Kira, is a compelling main character, he only is so in connection to the Death Note. Light, on his own, is not much more than an excellent student and overachiever, as you see in many anime series. The idea of having a popular kid who is also naturally gifted in academics is actually a really recurring character in anime, whereas in American shows, the cool guy would be the jock and captain of the football team. I love how this difference already says so much about what is valued in different cultures. But the core concept, having the notebook of a Shinigami, a god of death, and being able to use it to kill people is pretty awesome. How often have you seen some terrible tragedy on the news and wish that somehow you could punish those in charge of the suffering? I bet many of you can relate to Light, or, well, in this case, can relate to Kira. One thing I really love about the show and the concept of a Death Note is that it isn't just loosely introduced, but that there are actual rules attached to it. I love when shows introduce the rules of a game and actually stick to them, and that is exactly what Death Note does. Overall, there are quite a few rules, but the most important ones pertaining to how to use it are the following ones. First, the human whose name is written in this note shall die. Second, this note will not take effect unless the writer has the person's face in their mind when writing his or her name. Therefore, people sharing the same name will not be affected. Third, if the cause of death is written within the next 40 seconds of writing the person's name, it will happen. Fourth, if the cause of death is not specified, the person will simply die of a heart attack. And fifth, after writing the cause of death, details of the death should be written in the next 6 minutes and 40 seconds. There are way more rules regarding ownership and the relation to the Shinigami, but we don't have time for that. Creating rules is always a troublesome thing. Unless every single detail is thought out beforehand, it is quite difficult to set up a rigid structure of rules and to stick to them. This is exactly where the critics come in. One of the rules is that if you relinquish ownership of the Death Note, you also lose all memories related to it. However, these memories can be regained by regaining possession of the Death Note or by touching it. These two rules are key in later parts of the show, but their introduction is rather iffy. In comparison to the earlier rules on how to use the Death Note, these were by far not as established until they became necessary for another plot twist that showcases just how genius Light is. And at that point, we have already seen him do really great thinking, so a lot of people are a little disappointed by the fact that this part of the plot feels a little bit forced. For some people, this really takes the magic out of the show. Instead of being thought of as a masterpiece, it becomes plagued by the typical ills of shows with such strict rules, resulting in a disappointing plot solution where the rules are either broken, which to be honest wasn't the case here, or new rules which are added, making it take the turn for the basic. And now I have to follow one of the rules of YouTube and ask you to please like and subscribe if you are liking this content. But back to Death Note. The second thing I want to look at is the tone of the show. It obviously includes its fair share of violence, having clear components of crime and thriller shows as Light as the criminal and L, as well as his successors Nier and Mello, are there to catch him. The show is in many ways a typical cat and mouse show, where each one is trying to outsmart the other. The tone, however, is very dark and gritty, and in many ways makes the viewer think about what he or she would do in Light's situation. And yet, there are some aspects that don't quite fit with this dark and mysterious tone that the show takes. There are two characters which I think are a complete juxtaposition to the tone of the show. First, we have Light's Shinigami, Ryuk. Sometimes he seems more like a comedic relief than anything else. The question is, does this add or take from the show? And my vote on this is a little bit split. Sometimes it does interrupt the flow in a negative way, taking the edge off where you really just want more of the edge. But I don't think that the character itself is nonsensical. In many ways, the Shinigami must wish that they could literally be bored to death, because their realm is such a desolate place. So no wonder Ryuk is looking for fun and joy while on Earth. So to me, while I'm not always the biggest fan, I can kind of understand where Ryuk and the character come from. The second juxtaposition we see is Misa Amane. She seems like such a stereotype of a pretty dumb blonde. Her story is about fame and being liked, and seems so superficial in comparison to the darkness we see in Kira. And in the beginning, yes, she is a stark contrast. But I actually think that this is genius, because with her obsession with Kira, she quickly becomes way darker than the main character himself. After all, she does make the deal for the Shinigami Eyes twice, quartering her lifespan. Something which Kira couldn't even get himself to do once. Misa Amane is one of the most beloved characters of the show, and rightfully so. Her juxtaposition feels very purposeful, as she is not just in opposition to Light, but also to herself, putting on a front of this bubbly personality while there's this vast darkness inside of her. Also, how cool is it that she got two gods of death to fall in love with her? I mean, come on, that girl has some amazing power. Misa Amane is actually a character that I would say makes Death Note even more of a masterpiece, because it really plays with this idea of juxtaposition while she holds so much darkness inside of her. With Ryuk, it is different. While I don't mind the fact that Ryuk is oddly comedic, it does sometimes feel like the show felt like they had to put in some comedic relief, making it feel a little more basic than it would have to. Now that we have talked about the core concept of the show and its tone, there's one more thing that I want to talk about today: the flow of the story. The story is very clearly cut into two distinct parts. We have episodes 1 through 26, which goes up to the point of L's death. Then we have episodes 27 to 35, with both Nier and Mello, and the final 2 episodes with only Nier. The good news first. We got 26 episodes with L, which means that 2/3 of the show was the good part. The bad news is that once L dies and was replaced by Nier and Mello, the show just never quite recovered. In many ways, L was the perfect antagonist for Kira, because they're so similar. Both characters are academically gifted, enjoy being challenged, especially when it comes to mind games, but also tennis. And both have a very eccentric personality. They match up against one another perfectly, and in many ways, I see a similar thing with Kira and L as I do with Batman and the Joker. They need each other. But when L dies, we are left with a hole that neither Nier nor Mello, nor both of them together, can fill. They're no match for Kira, or at least they shouldn't be. Yes, in the end, Nier and Light have their big confrontation, and in the end, Ryuk writes Light's name into his Death Note. We see how Nier had planned this all along, tampering with the Death Note to find out who Kira is. But seeing Nier triumph over Kira just feels wrong. Not that I have anything against Light being killed at the end of the show. Getting him for good feels like an honor that should go to L, not to Nier. The second part of the show is certainly a letdown in comparison to the previous two-thirds of the series. This is something we can see time and time again, that the endings are just a little disappointing after you've gotten to fall in love with the mystery of the show. The conclusion just isn't satisfying enough, being one more point of why some may say it's basic rather than a masterpiece. Despite this, I would by no means say that the last third of the show compromises the genius first part that much that it can actually ruin its reputation of a masterpiece. Thank you so much for watching Rebel Culture and my take on Death Note. For me, it will always remain a masterpiece, even though I can totally understand some of the reasons why others might disagree. Which side of the argument do you land on? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want more content like this, then just keep watching. Thanks again and see you soon here on Rebel Culture.